Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and with the release of the 2019 MacBook Pro, I thought now would be a great time to solve that age-old mystery of can you game on a Mac? As for these gaming tests, I will be running all of the applications natively on macOS. Now I know that if you install a Windows Boot Camp, you get a lot more options on what games you can play because you basically get the entire Windows library of games to play on your Mac, and that is a lot of games. So I'm not doing that for this video. However, if you are interested in a future video where I show you how to install Windows on a Mac and then the type of gaming performance you can expect from Windows running on the Mac, let me know in the comments below if you want to see a video like that, and I will be sure to do it. And also, if you have any gaming recommendations for that video, be sure to leave them in the comments below. So for this video, I am using the 2019 MacBook Pro with the Core i9 running at 2.3 gigahertz. For the graphics card, I am using the Radeon Pro 560X. Now, if you aren't happy with the graphics settings you're seeing from this video, Apple does offer more advanced graphic options in the form of the Vega 16 or the Vega 20 graphics card, which should offer more performance than the Radeon 560X that I am using in this video. Now, for the first test, I thought we would run a game that's probably pretty popular, and that would be Fortnite. Actually, is Fortnite still popular? I'm not really caught up with Fortnite. I don't really play it all too often, and this opening cutscene with a banana running around was just really confusing to me, so let me know in the comments below. Anyway, after we load up Fortnite, I set the graphics to around the full HD setting for the MacBook Pro, which is around 1650 by 1080. For the first test, I set the graphics to high settings. Now, when I tested this game out on the 2018 MacBook Pro, I recall that the game was really poorly optimized and basically ran like a hot mess, so I'm hoping that it's better optimized now for the 2019 MacBook Pro, or if it's not optimized, that the 560X can brute force its way to a stable frame rate. Now, playing the game on high, I am noticing much better and much smoother frame rates than the old 2018 MacBook Pro. On high settings, we're getting around a constant 45 frames per second with some occasional dips. And as you can see, as I die in this video, you probably shouldn't be playing Fortnite with a trackpad. Now, Fortnite is a game that is fast-paced, so every frame matters, so I really wouldn't feel comfortable playing it at 45 frames per second, so I'm gonna drop it down to medium settings to see if we can get around 60 frames per second. And as I drop the settings to medium, I am getting exactly the results I wanted. Fortnite is basically playing at a stable 60 frames per second with some occasional little dips. Overall, some okay performance on Fortnite. I wonder if this would run better if I booted it on Windows on the Mac, but this does seem a little bit more optimized than when I played it back in 2018. Now, to contrast what I consider a poorly optimized game with a game that is really optimized for macOS, I decided to load up one of my favorites, Starcraft II. Now, admittedly, Starcraft II is a bit of an older game at this point. However, you do get some more advanced graphic options, and there are a lot of enemies and physics on screen during bigger battles, so I still think it is a good test for Mac gaming. One of the other things I like about Starcraft II is that it supports a beta for the Metal API, which should offer increased performance over OpenGL. So running at the same resolution, 1650 by 1080, on ultra settings using the Metal API, we are getting around a frame rate of 50 frames per second. However, as you notice, if we get into a really large battle with a lot of units on screen, we can see some major frame rate drops. During those bigger battles, I don't like getting those frame rate drops, so let's drop it down to high settings and see how we do. Now, in high settings, we're getting around a frame rate of 60 frames per second, which is pretty good. However, during those bigger battles again, we are still getting some slight frame dips. For a game like StarCraft, getting a frame rate drop at the heat of the moment when you need to micro and macro all of your units isn't good, so let's drop the game to medium and see how it performs. Now, on medium, we're getting much better performance with the frame rate staying around 120 frames per second, and during those bigger battles, we aren't experiencing those major frame drops like we were before. After all of those fast-paced games, I thought I would load up a slower-paced game, and this one is called The Witness. Now, overall, The Witness looked pretty good, and it is a slower-paced game, so you don't really need those higher frames per second as you're solving these puzzles. So this game, you can crank it up to a higher setting and appreciate the higher fidelity of graphics. Admittedly, this is my first time playing The Witness, but I gotta say, it's pretty tranquil and pretty visually appealing, so maybe I gotta pick this up after finishing this video. Now I wanted to move on to other games that featured some benchmarks on macOS. So I loaded up Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. For the first test, I put the graphics on high settings and ran a benchmark. As we run the benchmark, you can see that we're getting around an average FPS of 30 frames per second. But notice as we see something really graphically intensive like an explosion, that frame rate really drops down. As we finish the graphics test, we can see that we have a max FPS of 47.78 frames per second and average frames per second of 29.45, very close to the 30 I cited before, and a minimum FPS of 9.87. If we bump the test down to medium, we can actually see some pretty similar results with a medium FPS of 35.01 and a max FPS of 55 frames per second with a minimum FPS of 16.6. As I loaded into the game, it was still very playable on high or medium settings, and it looked pretty close to what I would expect to play on a PlayStation 4. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know I'm a big fan of Civilization VI. I constantly mention it in almost all of my Apple videos that have to do with gaming, considering it runs on the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. Civilization VI also has some really great benchmarking settings for gaming. So I ran a high graphics settings on Civilization VI, and you can see all of the information that this game has to process with all of the different units on screen. The late games of Civilization VI can really have a massive scope towards the end of the game, so I really appreciate these benchmarks being loaded in to see how well you would perform in a late game scenario. As we round out the test on high settings, we can see that we're getting a 31 frames per second, and this is fine for a Civilization VI game because it's a turn-based game, so having a higher frame rate really isn't that beneficial. Now, another thing about Civilization VI is this game can be particularly intensive on the CPU, especially in the later game when you have a lot of computer opponents who have to make different sorts of moves. The loading for those turns can take a long time if you're on a weak system. Thankfully, Civilization VI has a benchmark just for this where it can test the AI's average turn time, and this is a test that really pegs the CPU. And the Core i9 in the MacBook Pro doesn't disappoint here. You can see on this really complex scale of all of these different computers making different decisions, the average turn time rounds out at 10.48 seconds. Going around on the internet for a short period of time, this looked like a pretty good score, all things considered. And if you have Civ 6, you can run your own benchmarks to see how well your own system would do. Alright, so can you game on a MacBook Pro in 2019? The answer is obviously yes. The old saying is that you can't game on a Mac, and this simply isn't true. macOS has an ever-expanding, growing library of games that gets more impressive year over year. And with Apple Arcade eventually supporting macOS, the future for Mac gaming can be getting a lot brighter very soon. However, the gaming selection on Mac still pales in comparison to the vast amount of games you can play on Windows. However, you can also install Windows to run on macOS and then play any of those exclusive Windows titles right on your Mac. Now, I think the bigger question is, should we be surprised that a $2,799 laptop can run a game on medium to high settings and not even at 60 frames per second or even 4K resolution? And that answer is no. Obviously, if you got a thick gaming laptop with better cooling and a better graphics card, you could expect much better results than we're seeing with the 2019 MacBook Pro. And of course, if you had a desktop, whether that was even an iMac versus a PC desktop, of course you can expect even better performance than a gaming laptop or a MacBook Pro. However, that's not to say that you can't game on a MacBook Pro, because we did just that, although I wouldn't expect to be playing any of the modern games out there on high settings with a frame rate of 60 frames per second or at increased 4K resolutions. Like I mentioned at the start of this video, you can even get better performance if you upgrade to the Vega 16 or Vega 20, where you should get higher frame rates, increased graphic options, or higher resolutions. And while I would never recommend that anyone purchase a MacBook Pro for the sole purpose of gaming, honestly, that is just a very silly notion. If you want to play a couple of games on your Mac on medium settings, this should do the trick. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any further questions about gaming performance on the 2019 MacBook Pro, make sure you leave a comment in the comments below. If you want to support the channel in any way, make sure you check out the links in the description. And as always, if you like the video, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more from my channel, including further coverage on the 2019 MacBook Pro, make sure you subscribe. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.